On behalf of Good Systems and the Office of Academic Technology, I'm really excited and happy to have you here, and really looking forward to our next panel. I'll let our panelists introduce themselves, but I'll have Peter Stone take it away.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I guess I'll pass that on, that we'll have panelists introduce themselves. I'll introduce myself briefly. I'm Peter Stone. I'm a professor of computer science and director of Texas Robotics. I guess as a part of the introduction, I'll set the tone by asking people to also talk just about what for you is one of the big questions of AI ethics and academic integrity in this age of generative AI. And I'll lead off by saying an eye-opening moment for me was that recently I had the honor of being the keynote speaker at UT Austin Honors Day. And I spent a long time giving trying to craft this 10-minute speech of what kind of advice can I give to students, sort of like a commencement address. And I spent a lot of time on it and sort of obsessed over it, and got comments from from family and friends, and then at the end, several people told me that they assumed that I had used ChatGPT to help me write the speech. And I realized that somehow we've gotten to a point where if you don't tell people that you didn't do that, which I didn't, they start assuming. And this is a very different world than we've been in the past. So that's sort of a recent anecdote that's high on my mind and is sort of shaping the way I'm thinking about this conversation. But why doesn't everybody introduce yourselves, and then we'll take it away.
Thank you, Peter. Sherry Greenberg, Assistant Dean for State and Local Government Engagement and Professor of Practice at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. You posed a question, and I've been thinking about it, in particular when we talk about academics and the classroom and teaching and learning. And I've been reading a book entitled AI Integrity. And it's really made me think about, we talk about ethics, we talk about responsibility, but integrity really is integral, right? How do we bake integrity into the development of AI, and where do we cross that line, right? In academics, in the classroom, in research, and in teaching and assignments, from integrity to, no, this isn't integrity.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Craig Watkins. I wear a few different hats here at UT, professor in Moody College of Communication, one of the principal investigators for the Good Systems Grand Challenge, and also executive director of the IC² Institute. And what I'm looking forward to discussing today, I guess for me, the sort of revelatory moment, like I think it was for so many of us, was November of 2022, the release of ChatGPT, and the immediate reaction by educators and the press about this issue around academic integrity, fraud, and how quickly our thinking changed from that initial sort of knee-jerk reaction and where we are today, which is a constant state of evolution and reckoning with the technology that's not going away. And so how do we develop the skills and the agency to use it in ways that expand the capacity of our students and all of ourselves?
Hi everyone, I'm Malat Oldu. I'm a student here at UT, journalism major with a minor in media and entertainment industries. For nearly 2 years, I've worked on the innovation and media team at Moody College. I kind of got my views shaped around technology, education, and what that looks like for students like me. And I guess one question I have in mind is, like, I really want to know how professors are actually approaching AI. I feel like there's a wide range of approaches, and I'm just curious on what that looks like for student learning.
Good morning, everybody. Art Markman. I, again, like Craig, wear a lot of hats here. I am a faculty member in psychology, joint appointments in human dimensions of organizations in the marketing department at McCombs. I am our senior vice provost for academic affairs, and have been playing around. I mean, I was an undergraduate major in cognitive science, so actually a lot of the math that underlies large language models were in my undergraduate honors thesis, right? I mean, the math's been around a while. It's the computing power and the data that have been the real advance in many ways. But I am fascinated by trying to use this moment in time to figure out how do we realign reward structures in education by using better teaching practice to change the nature of what it is that students think they're doing in our classes in ways that would make academic misconduct in general and specifically with AI less attractive.
Great, thanks everybody. So yeah, and I guess I should have mentioned some of my other hats too. I didn't know we were going to go on a number of hats competition, but
no competition, Peter. Please.
The one I should have mentioned that I didn't is also I am a founding member of Good Systems, and that's one of the along with and part of the executive team with Sherry and Sharon, who's on the previous panel, Ken, who's here, many of the people, and that's sort of I think one of the things that makes it so that I'm thinking it's one of the groups where I think about these things all the time. So I think great introductions. From Sherry talking about integrity and what does it mean, and I think we should maybe dig into who is the agent of integrity. Is it that the AI program needs integrity? Is it the person using the program? So maybe we can go there a bit. Craig brought up fraud and sort of the question of I guess cheating is where is always a conversation when it comes to ethics and AI. I think Malat, your point of asking how professors are approaching this, I think is very very tied up with that. So we can dig in there as well. And then Art, you talked about the reward structures for students, and that reminds me of sort of an anecdote or maybe an analogy that one of my colleagues said is that if the people are often saying, oh, these AI tools are going to just cause people to cheat and they're not going to learn anything anymore. And my colleague said, if the football coach tells the linebacker to go lift a bunch of weights, 20 reps, and then come back, it never occurs to them to have a robot go and lift the weights while they're sitting in the corner reading the book, right? The whole point is for the person to do it. And yet somehow that's, the conversation around that students are gonna use the tools to not do their assignments, and then whose responsibility is that? Is that the student's responsibility or the professor's responsibility? So I think we can dig in there as well. And I want to keep I think we could actually since this is ethics in learning. And we can broaden it not just to be about teaching and classrooms, but also about publishing and reviewing and how that's how it's changing the landscape there. And I will say I'd love to make this a discussion. So I'll try to leave time at the end, but also if anybody wants to just raise your hand in the middle to react to something that somebody says, please don't hold back. This is we can make this very much a conversation. So let's start with Sherry. You led us off with integrity. Maybe we can all comment on this. Who is the agent of integrity, and how do we safeguard that? And I think that does tie to Art's point as well. Like how do we align incentives? So let's start with that word, integrity.
It certainly does, and in Good Systems, which, as you mentioned, I'm a member of, and several of us here, we spend a lot of time thinking about what's good, what's ethical, but integrity, right? What is the core value, I think, right? To me, integrity gets to your core values. And as a human, your core values, but here with AI and human in the loop, what are the core values that I think we need to bake into the development, right? A lot of times with ethical AI, it's, well, the AI's been developed, we're implementing it. Oh, now we're going to think about responsibility, fairness, transparency, what's ethical. And what we're thinking about here is how do we bake in those core human values that we think are for the benefit of society and not detrimental into the actual development of the AI.
So you're raising a question. But I'd like also what's your first cut answer to it? So if the question is what measures can be taken to ensure that AI tools support rather than undermine academic integrity,
right?
How do you answer that?
Well, I answer that by saying, first of all, I believe that we start learning the day we enter this earth, and we stop the day we're no longer on this earth. And I think that it is very important in our education system to start right there with elementary school, right? Introducing these concepts, learning, appropriate learning, and the values, all the way through, if you have a PhD, through that program, and in our communities. We have libraries, we have community centers. I think that this is very important when we talk about introducing these concepts in education and academia. And then I think when students are here, for instance, at this wonderful University of Texas at Austin, that it's important that all students be exposed in an appropriate way pertaining to their degrees, to these human values, to human agency, to keeping human in the loop, and to those, to me, get to what is integrity in developing, not just, you know, looking at the outcome measures afterwards, but actually developing and then implementing and then assessing with outcome measures. Did we meet this?
Any other panelists like to weigh in or comment on this? Yeah.
Well, one of the issues is, what are you trying to accomplish in any setting, right? So, to draw on your analogy, Peter, about the linebacker, it wouldn't occur to the linebacker to have somebody else do their bench presses, because the strength that they're doing that in order to gain strength to play the game. But when I was in college, I worked at a lumber yard, and along with a college football lineman who we affectionately called Tiny, and he drove the forklift to lift all of the stacks of lumber onto the high shelves, because there was no point at that point in using his strength to do anything. The machine was just fine, right? What are you trying to accomplish? And I think that part of the problem we have in education is we don't actually specify the rules of the game particularly well. So what we do is we give assignments whose purpose is opaque. And so it makes it feel to the students like the reason for doing that assignment is to complete the assignment, as opposed to I'm doing this as practice for something, or as an assessment that might give you feedback on something, or, and when the purpose of the assignment is unclear, then the outcome matters more than the process. And I think to the extent that we as instructors really define the role of the process in creating a particular outcome, we can then define what integrity is, and not just define it, but also help make it less attractive for people to actually want to subvert the process, because they will miss out on the experience as designed.
Yeah, I would agree. In some ways, thinking similarly along these lines here that have been articulated, maybe one way in terms of how I think about this question or issue is, how do we design for integrity, like as instructors? And so, if this technology has taught us anything, right, is that perhaps we need to rethink the kinds of assignments that we create for students. We need to rethink the kinds of products, deliverables, outputs that they generate for us. And maybe, just maybe, if the types of assignments that we give them can actually be completed by simply dumping a prompt or a question or an assignment into a generative AI model, and it can produce essentially what the professor is looking for, then maybe that's a problem, right, in terms of what we're asking students to do, what we're asking students to demonstrate in terms of competency, to demonstrate in terms of critical thinking. And so in some ways, I think it will require us to sort of rethink how we develop assignments, how we generate learning experiences and spaces that really allow our students to express themselves, to express their agency, to express learning and critical thinking in ways that separate human intelligence from machine intelligence. And I think that requires us to really, again, sort of think about what it is we're expecting students to do. And to Art's point, right, what's the point of what it is we're expecting students to do? What are the learning outcomes? What are the impacts? What are the paths moving forward?
But there are times where we give assignments that ChatGPT or some other tool could do perfectly well, but there's still a reason we want people to do it. I mean, look, back in the 60s, they tried to, the new math said, let's get rid of all that drill and practice stuff because nobody needs to do that. And then what we discovered was, if you don't have all those math facts in your head, you can't get to more complex concepts like algebra because you're still counting on your fingers. And so there are times where the assignment that we're going to give people is something a computer could do perfectly well, but there are still reasons we want people to learn it. it. But then we have to communicate, this is why we're making you do this rather than the machine, because this is the thing that's going to enable you to go beyond what you might allow a machine to do.
Let me intervene on the student's behalf and let Milat. We're all jumping in, but the very polite student is deferring to the professor. So Milat, can we hear from you before we keep going?
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you said. I sort of agree. I mean, I think it's hard for me to answer this because I think it's only best if I use examples, because like as a student here. Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. As a student here, obviously I'm paying for tuition, and that's a lot of money. And so I do want to get as much knowledge as I can here in order to thrive in the real world, right? And so I guess talking to my peers and my own personal experimentation and my own personal research, there's ways where this tool can actually enhance what we're doing. For one example is for one of my classes, they gave us an exam review, and obviously the AI can do that. I can feed it my notes and feed it my whatever and say, do this for me. But if I want a good grade on my test, I'm gonna do it. And so, for example, I used my notes, and I used my notes for lectures and readings to complete the exam review. But then I heard about this tool called Notebook LM that I gave it my exam review that I studied, and it could generate a podcast of two people discussing what is happening in the exam. And the cool thing about it is it doesn't take from outside the internet, and it only takes from what you gave it. And so on top of studying, I'm cleaning around the house and I'm washing the dishes and I'm listening to this podcast of very realistic voices telling me about the content that's happening in my exam review. And even walking to classes, I'm listening to that. Another example is I know another student that uses Quizlet AI's feature where it can feed it the exam review or its notes, and it would make it automatically to flashcards and use that for studying. So there's ways that I feel it will enhance student learning and not entirely replace it. But I really do think unless students know the ways, there's going to be a lot of room for misuse.
So Milat, just to maybe pick up on Art's point. So you say, for your money's worth, you want to get as much knowledge as you can. Do you expect faculty, professors to give you assignments and ways of creating, and ways of learning that can't be done by generative AI tools? Or are we dropping the ball if we don't actually teach you how to use generative AI tools? You just gave some examples of some tools you discovered on your own. Is that our responsibility as an institution to be teaching you these tools, or should because it sounds like our conversation before you started speaking was how can we make it so that there are assignments that don't require these tools? Art said maybe we need some that you do. What's your perspective on that?
It's so interesting because there's innovative ways where I've heard professors use it. I know one class, they wanted to show how it shows biases or something like that. And you would generate, show a picture of a group of friends and what does that look like and stuff like that. So that's one of the ways I've heard. Another way I've heard of professors using it is fix my article for me, right? Make AP style. And it's really bad at doing AP style. So us as students, we fix what they did wrong with the AP style. So I don't know the ultimate solution. I don't know if we should start making assignments that don't need AI, or if there's innovative ways like the ones I've said, or unique ways where we can interact with the tools.
So I think it's both. It's not an either or. I see this as, and it was mentioned in the last panel, being transparent, right? Being transparent with your students and saying, if you're going to use AI to sort through more sources than a human possibly could, wonderful. If we're going to have an assignment where I ask you to interact with with a chat bot, let's be transparent about that, or if you're using prompts. And I think that it's really important to do both, to have assignments where you're not using AI, right? And explaining why that would be. I think about telling a child, brush your teeth. Well, why do I need to brush my teeth? Well, here are the consequences. If you don't brush your teeth as a child, you're not going to have them as an adult, and it's going to be very painful, right? I mean, there's an example. So why do we need to learn some of these things? Yes, you have to memorize the math facts. I know it's boring, but you need to do it because you need that conceptually. To balance that with, here are ways in which AI can really accelerate learning. You talked about listening as you were cleaning, and I thought back to a time when I was a child. I was actually taking 3 languages simultaneously that were rather different. Latin and French, okay, they have some similarities, and Hebrew. And I came up with this idea. In those days, we had tape recorders. I don't know if you know what those are, but we had them. And so I recorded in English and in Latin vocabulary that I had to learn, in English and in French vocabulary I had to learn, in English and in Hebrew vocabulary I had to learn. And then I would turn it on when I went to sleep, or when I was doing other things. And I'm thinking, wow, if we had just had AI, how much easier that would have been.
Greg, Art, I interrupted you before. If you still have your old thoughts, or you want to react to what?
No. I mean, this is a great conversation. I will say, if we think about use of AI, in a classroom in a positive way, right? I mean, I think there's 2 dimensions of this. One of which is there are lots of tools out there, some of which we're building here at UT, right? So UT Sage will be launching, is in open beta right now. We'll launch campus-wide in the fall, and that'll be a tutor that will be available where faculty can configure it. Students can then use it to learn particular topics, which I think is one example of a tool that might facilitate learning. But I also think that you can begin to build assignments to help students learn things. So for example, about a year ago, we as UT partnered with Grammarly to develop lesson plans for interesting things you might want to teach to, using generative AI. And so we have a whole bunch of open education resource lesson plans that use generative AI to teach particular kinds of concepts. And even if the particular lessons that were developed by faculty and staff here at UT aren't necessarily the right ones for your class, they're probably good inspirations for how to incorporate generative AI into a concept or a skill or an attitude you're trying to teach.
I think what I wanted to say is that if as instructors, all we're doing primarily is giving students assignments that simply require them to demonstrate rote memory, then that's a problem. And whether or not they're using AI or not is really immaterial. It's how we're thinking about and creating learning spaces, environments, and opportunities that I think is critical. I love this example, Malat, that you give, because I think it in some ways is sort of emblematic of what I think is really at stake here. And that is, right, our opportunity to sort of express degrees of agency, that is to say control, over how these systems are both designed and then how they're deployed in learning environments. And what you're talking about is what I think is probably going to be the real opportunity here, if we can realize it, is developing opportunities for more personalized learning. In other words, right, designing these systems in ways that meet a student where he or she is, that allows a student to begin to start developing, right, along a path that's sort of appropriate for them. And so figuring that out, right, you're figuring that out in terms of what tools you have that can sort of customize your learning environment to sort of help you sort of navigate all of the different assignments that you've been given as a student. But I also think, right, in terms of instructors, in terms of educators, how we also begin to start thinking about how these tools can be used as ways to sort of make learning more personal, more personalized, that is to say. I mean, the really big, I think, opportunity and what we're seeing a lot of energy around AI is around coaching, around companionship, around relationship. And so this idea, right, of AI being not a place where you go to get answers, but a place where you go to sort of discover answers, right, to discover your own agency, to sort of learn, develop, and evolve is going to be a really critical opportunity for us. And so, building tools, building spaces, building curricula that allow students to develop those skills are going to be important, not only for what they do here, but increasingly what we're learning from employers, right, in terms of what they're expecting, right? Employers are expecting, right? I was just at a big meeting in Chicago last week, meeting with a large group of people in advertising and marketing, and they're all expecting, right, their new hires to come in with some understanding of how to use these tools. Not only to use them, right, to sort of, just do the work for them, but to use it to accomplish tasks, to use it to think critically, to use it to innovate. And those are things that we really need to begin to start thinking about as educators in terms of how we help students prepare for that future.
That's so true. The employers want the future employees to come in with the appropriate level of AI literacy, as we were talking about. Now, if you're doing high-level coding, and I mean really high-level now, right, that's different than if you were in management or leadership or in marketing. But you still need to have that AI literacy. And the creative skills, the critical thinking skills, the analytical skills, having empathy, right? I don't know about you, but I don't think agentic AI has empathy. Having the empathy is very important. And knowing the questions to ask. When we think about ourselves as humans, what are we? We're questioning, right? We're asking those questions. And then knowing how to apply those tools. When I used to teach finance, I would give a comprehensive, final, but I would say, here, I'm going to give you a list of the formulas, and you can use your notes, because what I'm looking at is, do you know what to apply and how? Which formula do you need to use and how?
So some of this is a great conversation so far. Some of what you're talking about, and especially Art, you expressed it well when you said we need to be clear about what the purpose of the assignment is, what the learning is, and that reminds me of one of the most formative educational experiences I had in my early life, which was in my 10th grade chemistry class. I had a teacher, Dr. Demon. It turns out, I found out later, his PhD was not in chemistry, it was in education, which doesn't surprise me, because I think he had a method in this class that actually stands up today, and would still be completely appropriate. And what he did was that if you got an A or a B on the exam for a particular unit, you earned the right for the next unit to take responsibility for your own learning, in the sense that he would give you a whole bunch of homework assignments, but you only had to do them until you felt you had mastered the concept, after which you were supposed to go and help the other students, teach the other students. And I learned much more in that class because I wasn't doing the assignments, the homework assignments mindlessly. I was doing them for the purpose of learning, and then I was teaching for the purpose of learning. And to me, this separated sort of the notion of assignments, because right now they sort of teach it, they serve a dual purpose. They're both to teach you something and they're to evaluate you. And this completely separated those two. The homework assignments were just to teach me something. I was not going to be evaluated on them. And so I wonder, if this anecdote sort of, if there's more things we can do in this vein, if generative AI actually pushes us to do more things in this vein, and if there's other ways that we should be thinking about separating tools for teaching versus tools from evaluation. Any of you?
Well, to me, this gets back to, Craig, what you were saying, and really what I wish I'd had your teacher, to the individualized instruction, right? He was doing individualized instruction for you all without, of course, AI. And what Craig was talking about is this ability to have the individualized instruction and coaching and tutoring. And we're seeing some really innovative use of AI in the tutoring world, too. So I think that there are great opportunities there.
Yeah, and to pick up on that, I mean, I think, when we teach, in pedagogy, they talk about there's knowledge, student learning outcomes, right? Knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And we as college faculty really overemphasize knowledge, right? Our 3 hours of stand-up comedy a week up on, in our classes is a lot of knowledge, and it's lighter on skills and attitudes. And then maybe some of our assignments get at the skills, and the attitudes, hopefully they come through in a more implicit way. I think the real promise to me of a lot of these AI tools, and this is to pick up, Sherry, on something you were saying, is to the extent that we can use some of these AI tools, some of the tutors and other packages, to really ensure a level of knowledge coming into a classroom, then we can focus more of our time when we're engaged with students on the skills and the attitudes without having to also recapitulate all of these knowledge outcomes in order to make sure that people who didn't quite understand the reading or didn't quite do the reading get everything that they need. And I think that's the exciting part, is the prospect that it might actually give us a better baseline of knowledge for students walking into the classroom, so that we can actually focus on some of the more complex work that really does require our expertise.
Yeah, so Milad, maybe keep us grounded here. Is the stuff that we're saying, does it make sense from a student's perspective? And do you feel like you're getting the appropriate balance of skills and attitudes compared to knowledge in the classes? What can we do better?
I guess with a lot of like AI, a lot of my learning has come from outside the classroom. I feel like just recently, the university started, giving us courses or offering courses, theory-based AI classes. I was fortunate enough to take AI in Society with Professor Craig Watkins, and going into the class, I thought I had a pretty good grasp on like what AI is and all this stuff, but finishing the class, I feel like a lot of the students there can say that we learn things about AI in the back end, like privacy implications, that really can like lead us to become more, not even informative users, but intentional users. Like what you said about morals, our core morals, that's what integrity is, right? But how do we develop those morals if we don't even know what the problems of these tools are, And like when we found out, for example, like our data being collected at these like massive data centers around the world, and powering these tools and what that looks like, knowing that, I feel like with guidance, students can make better habits with AI and can also really develop the morals and saying, hey, I'm gonna probably stop using AI to generate like my cat to be a human, and maybe start being an intentional user of AI.
So that's a fantastic transition to where I was going to go next. One of the sort of dominant words in the conversation so far has been integrity, but Craig, you used the word agency, and Milad, I think you're also talking now in that last bit about agency. There's a common fear that's sometimes articulated now, is that people will become overly reliant on AI tools, cognitive offloading, and so we've talked a little bit about it is maybe a responsibility for us to teach students how to use AI, but also from an ethical perspective, what's the responsibility to try to help people not be over reliant? How can we foster a culture that values and protects the agency of both faculty and students in the age of AI?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think in some ways, right, one of the kind of fundamental challenges moving forward. The way I've thought about it is, we tend to think of AI as something that's happening to us, right, because it's moving at such a fast pace. The technology is everywhere, omnipresent, implicated in virtually everything that we do now, oftentimes without us even knowing it. And so there's a sense, right, that our sense of agency, our ability to exercise some modicum of control or influence of the technology is significantly reduced if we have it at all. And so I think in some ways, right, what I've become, I think, really committed to in my classes and working with and teaching and learning from students like Milad and others is how do we really begin to fashion a fundamentally different mindset in terms of how we think about AI, our relationship to AI, what we can leverage AI to do, being intentional, being very purposeful. In other words, right, technology that's not so much happening to us, sort of determining us, but how do we, in some ways, determine our own fate, our own path, our own experience with technology, I think is really important from kind of a mindset perspective. As we began to read more and more of the literature, this is, I think, something that's becoming really important in terms of, I just saw a really interesting paper that was produced by Anthropic. Anthropic is one of the big AI companies that's produced the large language model Claude, for instance. And they were particularly interested in how people are using AI at work now. And so they obviously, right, have access to all this massive data in terms of how people are deploying Claude. And they begin to start thinking about sort of the distribution, right? People who are using Claude primarily, right, in an automated fashion, that's to say just to do the work for them, versus people who are using, Claude as an augmentative tool or resource. In other words, to assist them, to partner with them, to sort of, i.e. kind of, quote unquote, co-pilot, right, how they pursue and achieve their mission in terms of whatever their task is at work. And so it's a really interesting sort of case study. If you have a chance, if you reach out to me, if you haven't seen the paper, we'd be happy to share the paper with you. But it's quite instructive insofar as it really is an opportunity to begin to start thinking about, right, where we as humans and how we express agency in terms of our adoption to engagement with AI. And so I think this is going to be really, really critical from both an instructional perspective and how we inspire our students to be much more agentic, much more intentional, much more purposeful in terms of how they use and think about AI.
Art?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, it's a tool that is fairly new in our public consciousness, and I think that part of what we have to do is to wait to see how the tool diffuses, what sorts of things we're able to do with it easily and accurately in ways that will change the nature of what our work is. So, when I took statistics as an undergraduate, I had to calculate all the formulas by hand, and then and it wasn't cheating later when I could use SPSS to do those same things. And if if now if I had a data set and I could just formulate a natural language query and it spit the data analysis back at me, all the better, right? As long as I have learned how to actually answer a question with data. Right? I mean, to actually formulate a good empirical question and then know whether the data analysis I got back was a reasonable answer to it. So I think that as the nature of our tools changes, the nature of what it is that we think we ought to be doing in order to do something sophisticated also changes. And I think that we're going to have to be really adaptive on that and not necessarily hold the line on everything and say, well, it doesn't count unless you're calculating that correlation by hand.
I agree. And when I think about agency, you get online, there are cookies. Do you go and do you say reject all or reject everything I can or go to another website, right? So this agency is very important. I teach an AI ethics and policy class, and of course, agency is a core value that we talk about in there. And we cannot give up our agency, right? It is core to us as humans to have that agency and to think critically. And when you talk about cognitive offloading, I think emphasizing the critical thinking skills, the creativity, the empathy, those values, and looking at times where, yes, AI could do this, but it's for you, as we talked about, and you're learning to also be able to do it. But the agency, I think, is essential.
Yeah, this question's pretty hard because, it is a really big concern. I'm not going to sit here and lie about that. I think, from a student perspective, I think the best thing that professors can do, in my opinion, is an open conversation, honestly, with their classes. Like, every time we step in a classroom in a student's perspective, there's an elephant in this room of like, oh, can we use AI in this classroom? Like, is it allowed? Like, we don't really know. And I feel like if students don't know, there's a lot of room for them to use it wrong or to use it in ways that are not going to help them or to miss opportunities to learn better. All these things can start from just having a conversation with their classrooms. I really do believe that.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I got a random email back in the fall from a parent of a UT student, a first-year student, and they had been accused by the professor of academic dishonesty. Essentially, the professor thought that the student had used used an AI system to write the paper. It was essentially sort of charging the student with fraud, and so there was a whole process. And you can only imagine, right, what this first-year student was going through in terms of the amount of stress their sort of initial introduction to the university, obviously not a very pleasant one. As the parent of a college-age student, obviously recognizing the degree of stress that the parents experience, and I didn't know this parent. I guess they had seen me and doing something related to AI and just thought it was something that I should be aware of, thought it was interesting, and was just reaching out. I mentioned that sort of on the back end of your observation because I think you're exactly right. Sort of faculty establishing right from the very beginning, from day one even, right? What are the parameters? What are the use cases? When is it appropriate, not appropriate? Just being transparent, right, about those issues, shared to your point as well, where we're not in a position, right, where that elephant is in the room, where we're not in a position, right, where we're confronting our students, creating an environment of tension, creating an environment of conflict, right, that's simply uncomfortable for everybody. And so, you know, because we all are sort of learning on the fly, because this is all happening so quickly, the reality, right, is that none of us have been trained to sort of deal with these machines, to deal with these technologies in any sort of direct way. Indirectly, maybe yes, but directly, no. And so it's all experimental. It's all sort of discovery. We're all learning. And so being transparent about that and creating a classroom environment that's transparent about that and creates the conditions in which students can understand the terms and then understand, right, where are the lines, right, and how do I draw those lines and understand the clarity of those lines. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I also want to point out, like, obviously, we're going to expect professors to be like, don't let AI write your papers. We expect that from you guys. But what we don't expect that you can surprise us is like giving us examples like Notebook LM, the podcast thing, or like Quizlet's AI's feature to help us like study better. Like giving us these ideas to enhance our learning. You know, totally banning it, I really don't think is going to stop people from using it.
Yeah, and I think as you know, our third grade teachers know that on any math arithmetic assignment, they need to tell their students, you can do this one with a calculator or you can't. And I think we just have to get in the habit of every single assignment saying how we want the tool. So I think that's a great point. I think we have, you know, on the topic of agency, I do want to give the audience some agency in steering this conversation. We have about 20 minutes left, so I have one more question I want to ask that I hope is a relatively quick one. But I encourage people to come up to the microphone if there's something you want to add in. And so I think I've with the support of Good Systems and with many of the colleagues, some who are on the panel here, I've taught 2 courses recently. One is for computer science and technology students to learn about ethics and social science. It was called Introduction to Ethical AI and Robotics. I co-taught it with Tina Peterson, who's a humanist. And then I taught a course going the other direction, which was called AI Literacy, or the Essentials of AI for Life and Society, that was designed for every undergraduate at the university, and Ken played a big role in that, and Sherry and Craig gave guest lectures in it as well, with the idea that in today's day and age, the first course was with the philosophy that every computer science student needs to know something about social science and the humanities, which wasn't the case when I was a PhD student. And the second one was with the idea that every student, whether you're a music major or an English major or something, you know, or anything, needs some literacy with AI in today's world. So to ask what might sound like a little somewhat self-interested question, should we as an institution require every student to take that AI literacy class before they graduate? And should we require all computer science and engineering students to take the ethical AI class before they get their degree?
I'm going to have a yes and a yes, and I'll tell you why. Ken Fleischman and I don't know, was it 8 years ago or so, we had some funding from a private sector entity to do some research over a couple of years about the use of AI. And we developed case studies, some of which you'll know about, you know, the autonomous vehicle or redlining of mortgages. We had 4 or 5. And we interviewed those who were developing AI in academia and in industry. We also interviewed lawyers in academia, in industry, and private practice, and we interviewed policymakers, right, at all levels. And we had these case studies, and we asked them all a set of questions. And what we found out was that at that time, those who were developing the AI, for the most part, said, you know, what this does as far as society and the effects, that's not my problem. I don't need to think about that. And when we were interviewing the lawyers and we gave them the case studies, this will not be surprising to you, the only issue they came down to is risk. Who bears the responsibility? What's the risk? And when we interviewed the policymakers, they said, well, I don't know exactly what it is, but we need to do something about it. And then we asked all of them, did you have anything in your education about what AI is, the technical? They all said, almost all said no. Should you? Yes, almost all of them said.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Sherry, yes and yes to both of those questions. I mean, primarily, right, just because the environment in which AI now operates is so different, and just the sort of widespread applications of AI. So if AI gets it wrong, for example, recommending a movie on Netflix or a song or a playlist for you on Spotify, it may annoy you, but it won't necessarily cause you any significant harm, danger to your life chances. But if AI gets it wrong in terms of hiring, AI gets it wrong in terms of admission, AI gets it wrong in terms of healthcare, AI gets it wrong in terms of criminal justice, the implications are quite severe, right? And so it is absolutely necessary to help people understand the broader social and ethical issues at stake here. AI is no longer just a technical problem to be solved, but to the extent that we are now deploying it in all of these high-stakes environments, it is now a social and ethical problem to be solved as well. And so equipping students just with the vocabulary, the framework, right, the ability to sort of ask those questions is absolutely critical, and I think that's something that we can do.
No. But that doesn't mean that these things aren't important. I'm not saying no to you. I'm saying no to the question. I have a problem with requirements, right? I think we have to be very, I want to be really clear. We have to be very careful when designing curricula not to make it really hard for students to graduate. And every time you pile on another requirement, you make it harder to graduate. That said, I think we should strongly encourage or perhaps require programs of study to incorporate this knowledge into those programs of study and to provide tools to make it easier for programs to incorporate that, which might include videos, which might include opportunities for guest lectures, which might include lesson plans and suggestions for assignments. So, and partly because we are in an interesting transitional phase right now in which these tools have come onto the consciousness, and it makes perfect sense to develop courses like this now to get all of us up to speed in a hurry. But over time, what we really need to do is to incorporate this into the way we're doing things rather than building a separate set of requirements around a tool.
So perhaps if we still had flags, it would be an AI flag.
Well, no, but that's the point. Part of the reason we don't have flags is because actually incorporating those skills into the way we teach everything is actually the better approach.
And I don't think the point is that whether or not it's a requirement or not. I mean, I'm not necessarily overly invested in requirements either. I think the real issue, right, is sort of integrating these ideas, thoughts, and considerations in the learning experience. Whether that's a hardcore requirement is one thing. We may or may not necessarily have to go that path, but ensuring that our students have been exposed to these issues, sort of trained to develop the sort of capacity to ask these kinds of questions and to think in this way is absolutely necessary. Not necessarily a requirement, but something that we can increasingly encourage our faculty across all manner of courses begin to start integrating elements of this into virtually everything that we're doing.
So let's give Milat the last word before questions. What do you think? What's the path?
Yes. I really do think, I don't know if I don't know. I would say yes, though. I think, before taking an AI class, I felt like I knew a lot about AI. I actually knew very little about AI, what's happening on the back end. And I think this stuff really matters to students, like privacy implications, the environment. You're not telling these students not to use it, but you're telling these students, what's happening in the back end, how it's impacting our world, how it's impacting jobs. Like, I think students deserve to know. On top of that, I feel like institutions play a really important role in this process. I feel like we need to start turning this conversation into, us versus AI, and not, students versus professors, right? And so I feel like that's important. And I also like to think that schools have a responsibility to break down this concept for us. I think that's how students are gonna, become more informative and intentional users with this tool. I have a lot of smart friends, and when I talk to them about AI, it surprises me how little they know about the back end. They know what the tool can do, but they don't know what's happening behind the scenes. And so, talking to these students and my friends, they think this is just like a magical solution. They think this is like not a tangible thing. They think, it doesn't really take up space in the real world. And that's just not the case, like, there's massive data centers around the globe, and it's just so surprising to talk to my fellow classmates and realize, like, once I tell them the information I learned in his class, they start saying, oh, okay, wait, I care about the environment. I'm going to start using AI in a different way. Like I said, they're going to stop using it in a foolish way and start using it in a way that it's going to help them enhance their learning, essentially.
Yeah, well, it sounds to me like your smart friends also have a smart friend back. So thanks. On that note, that's a great way to transition to questions. I would be shocked if there aren't some burning questions out there. So yeah, please.
So I just wanted to make a comment, and then I'll follow up with a question that I think Malat is showcasing sort of a dream student experience that has high self-regulation, high self-direction, wanting to shape their own learning using that agency, and providing an example of how she is doing that with AI. And so I think when we go back to our earlier conversation about what if the condition is it's there, but what if the condition is responsible use, we're seeing an example of someone who is, happens to be using AI to do this, but these are all the things that create and foster effective learning. I did want to ask, and I wanted to ask Malat, one of the things that we're encountering with students is that we are seeing students who are confused about whether it's okay to use AI in their classrooms. We're starting to see more of that. But we're also starting to see students who are coming to the table with the same kind of perspectives that you have, and they do not want to use AI in their classes. So professor might be having that conversation with them about how AI is allowed and we'd like you to use it for your assignments, but students are saying, I'm against using AI for these reasons. How do you recommend we work with those students to support and foster their learning?
Oh, that's
let me just say, let's try to keep our answers as succinct as possible so we can get to a bunch of questions.
Yes, that's a really great question. See, that's why I'm more like on the side of having a class that teaches not like how to use the tool, but like the risks and the impacts behind the tool, because then we're gonna start seeing students like have agency over like whether they want to use AI or not. And if they don't want to use AI, I believe they have every right to say that. I really do. I think if you start requiring students to use AI to help them in their learning, it's going to become like a calculator, It's going to become like a thing that we have to use in order to succeed, and that's just not the case yet, I think.
But are we dropping the ball if we don't teach our third graders how to use a calculator? If they get to sixth grade and they don't know how to use a calculator, is that not the same for AI tools?
Sorry, say that again.
So you're saying that if a student says I don't want to learn how to use an AI tool to do assignments, I think Art was saying the opposite, that it's actually our responsibility to teach students that how to use these tools, because they're going to be required in the workplace. Is it okay for us to just to say students, okay, you don't need to learn this, you don't need to know how to use the tools?
I feel like it should be required for us to know about the tool and us to know like how it works, and I don't think that technically means like
us having to use the tool, you know, for all cases.
Thank you for the great panel, very stimulating. So AI, generative AI is a statistical tool. So it really is not reasoning. And I think most people don't know that when they use it. So the more it learns statistics, and it's looking at whether this is 40% match or 60% match or 80% match, and gives you the answer. And the more it learns from data, it keeps on hallucinating. So how do you actually think this should be communicated to students and teachers who are using AI in the classroom?
Maybe I'll take a first crack at this one. This is there was actually an article in the New York Times yesterday about how reasoning models are hallucinating even more, and it's always been very confusing to me why people are so surprised that AI models hallucinate. I mean, this is like, as you said, they're not trained about anything to do with facts. They're trained not to give correct answers. They're trained to give plausible answers, answers that are likely to appear in speech, and so it's just like, you know, to me, people using an AI tool that was trained in that way to write a legal brief or a paper that requires factual information. It's like, you know, using a toaster oven to warm up your gloves and then being surprised that they catch on fire or something like that. I mean, that's not what the tool was built for. And so it's just, you know, I think it does come back to education, and that's what I mean when I say AI literacy, is that, you know, people should know that it's a great brainstorming tool. Like, you know, give it a prompt, see what ideas it comes back with. Maybe it'll give you new ideas. But if you're trying to use it to find facts, that's crazy in some sense. And so it shouldn't be surprising. And it always, like, every time I see an article saying, "Oh, these tools hallucinate," like, you know, yeah, what's new? Why is that news? So that's my answer. It's more of an educating people, like how they're built, what they are, and, you know, don't use them for what they're not meant for. Please.
Hi, thanks so much for this really interesting conversation. I've really been enjoying it so far. I wanted to ask, there's been a lot of instances in our society where skills that everybody had were suddenly things that were able to be performed by new technologies. And the way that we as a society have responded to that, especially in education, has really varied, right? So every student in America used to learn cursive, but I didn't ever really learn cursive except for maybe 1 or 2 lessons in first grade, because these days everything can be done on a word processor. Whereas on the other hand, some of you have alluded to this, everyone still needs to know how to do math, even though a calculator can do a lot of those basic equations. We all learned that in elementary school, right? So I wanted to ask, from your perspective, are there any skills that AI can perform that you don't think are necessary to teach students anymore because AI can do it? And if so, or if not, how do you make that decision?
Anyone?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, so working on different projects, and, you know, one of the projects that we're about to launch with one of our research teams, I think in some ways will at least position me better able to answer that question maybe after we do the research. In other words, you know, so I'm spending a lot of time these days thinking about the application of AI in the healthcare space, and sort of doing research, working on building, you know, technologies and platforms that integrate AI solutions in that way. And so there are a number of things that are of interest to me. And one of them is, and so we've done some work already in terms of surveying healthcare practitioners around the state, in terms of trying to understand, right, how do they think about these systems? Where do they draw the line in terms of where machine intelligence is the right application? And then what are some things that are uniquely human, right? Sort of human intelligence, and how do they draw that distinction? And so I think it'll help us to better understand, right, as we evolve with these technologies, what it is that machines are most effective at doing. But I think perhaps just as important, if not more important, right, or what are the things that humans are capable of doing? You know, what capacities, what intelligence do we have that are difficult to automate, difficult to sort of build into an algorithm? And it seems to me, right, then those become the skills that we really want to help students develop, whatever the domain or discipline or area of expertise is. And I think that will require, right, very specific kinds of inquiry into these very specialized sort of spaces and domains of knowledge and application to sort of think about, right, how do we reconcile this relationship between human
And that's exactly
intelligence?
where I was going. When you think about using AI and education, yes, there are facts that I think you still need to know. And when I think about some of the current applications, is it a better use of a student's time to use Excel? Or is it a better use of a student's time to be able to use the AI and then use their higher level and critical thinking skills to do analysis, right? And I would say, are you going to be using Excel in the workforce? No, you're not going to be using Excel in the workforce. I don't think. I think this is some of the areas where we're going to see AI, right, doing these lower level tasks that we used to have to do, and then us coming in and using our higher level thinking skills.
So before we take the one last question, maybe I'll add, where I was going to go, I can't think of anything that we should not teach at all because of the AI tools, but I do think it's a matter of degree, and I think I'll go back to the analogy of arithmetic. There was a time when not only did you need to teach people to multiply, two-digit numbers by two-digit numbers, but you needed to, after they learned the concept, to get them to practice to do, seven-digit numbers by five-digit numbers and to really drill it in. And at some point, that became tedious. And I think we need to teach to the level of learning the concept, but then teach the tool to replace the tedium. So I think it's dangerous if we just say, you can use this tool, you don't need to know the concept. But I think it can save us from going to the point of tedium. And I think that's, so I think everything that we have needed to teach in the past, we still need to teach, but we may be able to stop at an earlier level and then say, okay, from here, now that you understand how it works, now I'm going to teach you how you can save time and effort by using the tools that can do this. Last question.
Thank you. Malad, I'm sorry to make you the focus here, but you are the focus. Art, you asked a really good question, is, what are we doing all this for? And so I'm not in academia, so I coach CEOs and VPs how to use AI personally. So that's context here. And what I think the elephant in the room here is that Malat said she's learned AI outside of this university. So there's the elephant in the room. And so I wanted first a question to you, because I think Art asked a fundamental one: who is the customer? And I think the customer is sitting in this chair. I'm a graduate of this university, and I was gifted the opportunity to change my world, okay? So my question to you, firstly, is this. Just to boil it down, right, to just almost a yes-no. Do you feel better about this institution fundamentally making you maniacally a better person and a better professional by helping you use AI?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's that simple, all right? My second question I'm going to ask to you, and this is highly controversial, I'm not asking to make this change, but does this sound better to you? Today, what starts here changes the world, or is it better and more actually representative of what you expect to get from this university? And I had to look this up because I don't know the definition, so I'm going to read this first. Okay, empowerment has been variously defined as the authority or power given to someone to do something, or perhaps better, the process of becoming stronger and more confident, especially in controlling one's life and claiming one's right. So does this sound better? Empowered by AI, what starts here changes the world.
Yes.
Okay, so our customer is here, and so Cortez burned the boats when he wanted to, conquer something. So now for the panel, by the way, I so appreciate the challenges you guys are around the table. I am not minimizing them. But I think our customer here is speaking strongly and succinctly about where she needs to be to prepare herself. And so with that closing remark is, how do we empower this university to do that? And I'll just leave that as a final, maybe comment for you guys.
Yeah, anybody want to answer that as we wrap up?
Well, I mean, as a university, part of what we're doing is trying to build out a lot of AI tools that will be infused throughout the teaching and learning experience. So I already mentioned UT Sage, which will be available campus-wide in the fall, and will provide an opportunity for all faculty to create tools that will help students to engage. There's an AI platform for the campus that will enable everyone who wants to create custom GPTs that'll be launching in June. That will have much broader applicability, and so will also give us an opportunity to infuse that through what we're doing. Certainly in academic affairs, the Center for Teaching and Learning is trying to develop a lot of workshops and other things, some of which are provide student voice, some of which are providing faculty expertise to think about how to develop more tools. So I mean, I think we as a university, Julie Schell sitting in the front row here talks a lot about being AI forward and AI responsible, and I think we have, as a campus, have tried to be pretty AI forward. We did not immediately say put the brakes on everything. We've actually been encouraging people to dive in and play around, students, faculty, staff alike. And so that is, I think, part of the ethos here. I don't think that that's something, we have to diffuse it more widely, and the fact that we had 150 people signed up today and probably 80 or so in the room right now is a testament to how hungry people are to do this. So I see this as being fundamentally consistent with the way that we're approaching teaching and learning on campus.
I couldn't say it better myself. I don't think any of us could. So let's end on that note. Thanks, everybody, for the panelists and for the audience for a great conversation.